I'm George Nordhaus, and this is Monday morning. And this morning we have one of the top speakers. You're about to hear a presentation that most people paid a lot more money for than you are right now. I can promise you that over the years. Roger Sitkins is going to be talking about the 10 lessons of a lifetime. As you probably know, or maybe don't know, Roger was an agent way back when, and I don't know how many years ago, but he then started as a consultant with Gary Holgate, and between the two of them, many of the things we're doing today it just is a natural way of life, were brought to the industry by Sitkins and Holgate. And then Sitkins stayed after Holgate died and kept on becoming the most well-known probably consultant in the country. And then he finally started something called Sitkins International, which is a really good organization that I won't go into now, but if you don't know about it, you ought to look in to see it because it's amazing. Anyway, Roger, and you read his writing in the rough notes constantly, and I do, and I love it. And I'm honored that he would do this today, and he's going to be talking about top 10 lessons of a lifetime. But Roger, there's got to be a lot more than top 10.
Well, George, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, there are a lot more than top 10. About 4 years ago, I started writing a book. I'd never written a book before, and I got a lot of pressure from the internal team at Sitkins and from our clients that really wanted us to put some more things into the printed format, if you will. And I broke it down to strategies, sayings, and stories, and all of a sudden got up to 265 chapters. Well, that's way too many. So we broke it down a little further, and with my old football background, I'm a big believer in blocking and tackling 101. You know, do the basics better than anybody else. Always look for a new advantage. Make sure you're doing the basics really well. So we broke those down even further and actually created a book that's called the Top 20 Lessons of a Lifetime. Well, you and I agreed that the top 20 would take a while, so we said, let's even break it down further and say, of the top 20 lessons of a lifetime, because I've been out there consulting, coaching, motivating independent agents for over 30 years now. Well, let's just get it to the top 10 lessons. So that's really what I wanted to share today.
I should tell them that they'll be able to order that directly from the email that came today. You can order it, and you don't even charge for it. That's so nice.
Right. It's an ebook we're putting out there, and there's a QR code at the end of it. I think you'll have it on the handouts too, George.
Yeah, I will.
So let's get into it. Top 10 lessons. Lesson number 1, sales and service. You know, through the years, we've always talked about what are the 10 great plays, what are the 10 great strategies, and we have them for the sales area, sales management, the agency overall, service, financial, etc. Well, in the core areas, the division between sales and service is always strategy number 1. So that's why I really wanted to make it lesson number 1 as we broke them down. That we have to have a very strong division between the sales and the service functions within the agency. And unfortunately, in most agencies, they're mixed all the time, that we really get a confusion between salespeople and service people working together. And what we see is that the salespeople, you know, they wind up they start off selling insurance, and they wind up being very glorified service people all too often because they get drawn into the service trap. They get brought into doing more service than they do sales. Even now, when I go out and do speeches to state associations or national organizations or insurance companies, I'll always just talk about, you know, I'll start with them. How many of you are a member of a very proactive sales organization? And, you know, maybe a third of the hands will go up. And I'll say, well, how many of you are, at least your title has sales in some fashion? And the vast majority of hands will go up. And then I'll say, how many of you right now spend more time in service than you do sales? Almost every hand will go up. So we're allowing ourselves to mix sales and service, and we're getting drawn into the trap. At the end of the day, we say, you know, we've been pretty darn busy, but what did we really get done? When I used to go out and consult, and when I first started with Gary Holgate, in fact, when he consulted in my agency first, and then I eventually became a partner in the firm, when we would go out and meet one-on-one with agencies, we'd always talk about sales versus service, that we had to free the salespeople up to do the right things. That one of the reasons they're not making enough sales is they just don't spend enough time at it. Well, when I would sit with the personal line service people and the commercial line service people, I'd always ask them, do your producers get involved in service today? And the answer was always the same, yes. It was never, oh, yes. It was always yes. And their heads would drop, and their shoulders would drop, and their eyes would drop. I mean, they were just not happy. And I would say, well, if your salespeople got on the phone or talked to a client face-to-face and took some sort of a change, some information that needed to be processed by you, if they gave you 10 of those today, how many would be complete, accurate, and total, where you could process the change without going back to the producer or calling the client? And I'd normally hear, well, 2 out of 10. Well, that means there's an 80% error rate. And right now, today, when we still ask the question, we say, well, you know, about 1 or 2 out of 10 will be right. The rest we've got to handle again. Well, I'm a firm believer that if you only get paid once for a premium-bearing transaction, you should only handle it once. So an 80% error rate says to me, you're doing it wrong. If you do something wrong 80% of the time, you probably should be fired from it. Like the joke I always use is, you know, if you had a file clerk that misfiled 8 times out of 10, or a data entry person that misfiled or made an error 8 times out of 10, what would you do? Well, everybody says, well, you'd fire them. I'd say, yeah, or you'd make them a producer. But you wouldn't let them stay as data entry. Right? So it's the same thing here. So what we really want to do is free them up so the producers can spend 80% of their time in the 4 key money-making activities. What do I think they are? Well, number one, their sales. They've got to do everything they can to get out there face-to-face with clients, prospects, and centers of influence, making sure that they are face-to-face, they're involved in sales and sales-related activities. Okay? We've got to do that. Number two, people will say, well, Roger, don't they have to do some service? Yes, they have to deal with what we call emergencies in flight, which I'll talk about in a minute, but certainly no more than 20% of the time. The only service-related things we really want a producer to do are the proactive part of the renewal process, which we prefer to call the continuation process. So they will do some things, but it's proactive on keeping customers, not just dealing with day-to-day service that they have an 80% error rate at. Number three, well, I still am a firm believer that relationships are what it's all about. And I know your tagline, George, I saw one of your new ones, that it's about relationships. Well, I believe there are 5 types of relationships that need to be proactively managed. The clients, the prospects, the fellow team members, the centers of influence, and the insurance carriers. Well, what are we doing to manage those relationships? And what are we doing to make sure that we're taking care of the vital few versus the trivial many? Now, it's not 100% about relationships anymore. I understand that. It's about challenging people and taking them to change their business more. But at the end of the day, I still think people like doing business with people they have some sort of a relationship with. And the final one is pipeline building. You're going to see in a minute how important that is, that we get to the point where the producers every single day are doing things that build their pipeline. Now, that doesn't mean they're smiling and dialing every day, or they're doing direct mail, or they're chasing leads from the internet. But it means that they're doing something every day, whether it's networking, whether it's making deposits with people, but they're doing something to fill the pipeline. Because when you think about the best life insurance salespeople you've ever met in your life, what's the thing they do every day? They prospect, because they want to make sure their pipelines are full. And our attitude is very simple. Get your pipelines to the point where they're overflowing with more opportunities than time. When you get to that point, you have a much higher closing ratio because you get selective just because you can't get to all of them. So those are the 4 key, George. A big key to this is to identify what we call this emergencies in flight. The analogy we use in our producer camps all the time is that a producer's job is very much like that of an airline pilot. Takeoffs, landings, and emergencies in flight. That's what a pilot gets paid for. Well, what does a producer get paid for? Takeoffs, they sell it. Landings, they renew it, or again, continue the relationship. And finally, if there is an emergency in flight where they're the only ones that can solve it, they're the only ones that can talk to the client or talk to the carrier, they'll do it. But they only deal in emergencies in flight. They're not the baggage handlers, and they're not the flight attendants. Okay? So, lesson number 2, and this is about as foundational as I can possibly get. It's the whole core of everything I've taught for the last 15 to 20 years within this concept of the vertical growth experience. The 80-20 rule is alive and well in most independent agencies. How many? What percent? About 99.999%. I can tell you that in the thousands and thousands of studies we've done in agencies through the year, it's always true. So, and if you don't believe it, just as soon as you're done with this, go ahead and run a book of business report from your largest to your smallest account based on commission income, and break it down as I'll show you here in just a minute. And this is what you'll probably see. This is what we see in all of them, is that Vilfredo Pareto, who was the one that designed that came up with the 80-20 rule, was right. And by the way, it's been around for a while, as you can tell by his picture. This was about 1897. He was an Italian economist and sociologist, and he was doing a study on land ownership. And what he found was that 20% of the people owned 80% of the land, and 80% of the people owned 20% of the land. And what he really figured out as he continued to look at this phenomenon, if you will, is that there was a predictable imbalance in the universe, that everything flows along 80-20. That 20% of what you do gets you 80% of your results, and 80% of what you do gets you 20% of your results. I firmly believe that for most people, 20% of what they do brings them 80% of their happiness and joy in the world. Well, what if they did it 40% of the time? They might have 160% happiness and joy. So as we've looked at this, and we do this at least on an annual basis with our clients. A lot of them will actually do it quarterly. Some people never look at it because they say that's not my agency. I'll bet it is. And here's what we see. When you break it down, you just look at clients and revenues. Now, we break it down much further when we do an analysis with a client. But when you look at it, here's what we see, these two triangles or pyramids. We see that the A customers are the top 5% of the customers. When you look at your list, and I'm hoping most of our listeners have already done this, but when you look at your list, you'll just see there's a natural breaking point. If you had 1,000 customers, the top 50 would just stand out at you. And what we see is the top 5% of the customers will be 50% of the commission income. The middle 15% of the customers, the B customers, are 30% of the revenues. And the C customers, 80% of the customers are 20% of the revenues. So there you have your A's and B's that are 20% of the customers, 80% of the revenue. C's, 80% of the customers, 20% of the revenue. Well, when you look at it, some things really, I hope, jump out at you. If 5% of my customers are 50% of my revenue, that means the other 95% of my customers are the other 50% of my revenue. There's some real concerns that right away I start looking at vulnerability and profitability when I'm analyzing either a producer or an agency's book of business. Like, let me show you some of the additional lessons we learned on this. Number one is when we break it down even further, we see that the bottom 50% of the customers in the average agency are only about 5% of the revenue. It used to be 10, but now lately it's been trending down that it's only 5%. Wow. That means the top 50% of the customers are 95% of the revenue. Look at vulnerability and profitability again right there. Break it down further, the bottom 25% of the customers in the average agency are 2% of the revenue. Well, you know, what percent of our expenses are going to the bottom 50 or the bottom 25? I'll bet it's greater than that 2% or 5% of revenue. On the surface, the average agency could be losing money on 25 to 50% of their customers. And a rule I have in managing agencies is that we do not allow profitable accounts to subsidize unprofitable accounts. And yet we see it happening all the time because most people don't look at these numbers. Well, let's look on the high side, though, George. Remember, the top 5% of the customers are 50% of the revenue. Those are the A's. Well, we see the top 2%, which we call the super A's, are 35% of the revenue. Vulnerability and profitability again. In an average agency today, if they lost the top 2% of their customers, they might be out of business because they couldn't cut expenses quick enough. What if they lost the top 5% of their customers and didn't have any contingency or profit sharing income in a year? They're very vulnerable. Now, the good news is you don't have to do any of this stuff and you'll probably still be okay. But the bad news is, you know, agencies, what they do for their clients is risk management. Well, I think they have to look at themselves with internal risk management, say, where are we at risk, and play the what-if game. Well, if we lost 5% of our customers and 50% of our revenues, we'd be in real trouble. So that's why it's such a foundational thing to everything we do.
Roger, I think that's the most important slide I've ever seen.
It's
it
so
really,
crucial, George. And
it goes right to the heart of the matter. God.
well, yeah. And again, most people won't look at it. In fact, what we do with our clients when requested, and we used to do this all the time, is we actually break it down into a profit and loss for the A's, B's, and C's. If we only had the A's, what would our income and expenses be? If we only had the B's, only had the C's, that's pretty scary. All right, our next one, lesson number 3, the 4 R's focus. Well, we believe that agencies have to be able to answer, what's it all about? I mean, what are we really focusing on here? And, you know, it's not just, well, we're in the insurance business or we give great service. That's really fuzzy. I want clarity. I want a laser focus. So when we work with agencies, we suggest that they have 4 things they really focus on. Number 1, results. They make sure that everything they do is about getting a result, not just being busy. Most people just go through life being busy, and at the end of the day, they don't even know what they got done. How was your day? I was busy. What did you get done? I don't know. And they don't have a culture that drives results. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on in the agencies we work with is that Sitkins equals results. And I love acronyms, as you know, George. I was looking at one day and I said, Sitkins equals results. The 7 letters you need, Sitkins, to get the 7 letters you want, results. And we really believe in that. You've got to have everything in your company needs to be focused on getting a result. Now, everybody wants different results. Some people just want profit. Others want growth and profit. Others want people development. Others want time freedom, financial freedom, whatever it may be. But define what the results are that you want, and then let's put together the behaviors and strategies that get us the results. Second, well, again, I do believe it's about managing those 5 relationships we talked about. Third, retention. Well, one of the great things about our business may be one of the bad things. The great thing is that 90 to 95% of your customers will renew every year, and yet most people don't seem to have a handle around what do we really have to do to improve retention. As I mentioned, we don't like to just renew accounts. We want to continue relationships. So rather than a renewal process, we teach a continuation process. What do you have to do to make sure there's clarity about what the client wants, and how do you improve retention? Because I've heard you talk about this for years, George, that if you can take your retention from 91 or 92 to 93, 4, or 5, the increase in profitability is exponential. It's amazing what happens in operating profit when you can just tweak retention a little bit. And then finally, referrals. Are we doing those things that, in fact, earn and generate referrals? Many times we get referrals because people just like us. But I've done studies in agencies, and I've asked them, take a look at what percent of your customers renew. Well, as we said, 94, 95%. What percent refer? Ooh, 5 or 10%. So look at the conflict. A very high percent renew, a very low percent refer. We're doing a good enough job to get them to stay with us, but we're not wowing them to the point that they're sending friends and associates to us. So I think our focus has got to be results, relationships, retention, and referrals. Lesson number 4, well, what's your marketing strategy? What are you going to do to go out there? And marketing is a series of events that gets you to a result. It's not a one-time mailing. It's not, and I know you teach this in Agencies Online, where you've got the great programs and the websites that people can have a series of events. Well, again, I like to keep things simple and say, okay, summarize it. What's our ultimate marketing strategy? Well, I think the first thing we have to do is we have to round out existing customers. Okay, everybody's heard that for years. It's not a new thing. But why is it then that still 66% of personal lines and 49% of small to average commercial lines are single policy customers for the agency? Because we're doing order taking versus having an upfront process and a retention process that gets to the point where we say, you know what, we want full-time clients only. Second thing, retain. So we're going to round out all of our customers. We're going to retain the customers we want to retain. And there's a phrase that one of our great friends and clients, Jeff Cavignac at Cavignac and Associates in San Diego, coined one day. He said, I want 100% effective retention. And I thought, well, 100% is good. I said, what do you mean effective? He said, I want to retain 100% of the customers I want to retain that I had a chance to retain. In other words, if they sell, they go out of business, they merge, they do whatever, I might not lose them. But the ones I want to retain, did I retain 100% of them? So round out, retain, and then finally replicate. Well, I think you're going to replicate something, especially if you get proactive on doing the right things with your clients, earning and generating referrals and introductions. You're going to replicate something. Well, I believe you want to replicate your A's and B's, not necessarily your C's. If your A customers are 5% of your revenue, why don't you just spend a whole year trying to replicate them? Because if you did, you'd grow by 50%. And if your B customers are 30% of your revenue, why don't you spend the next year trying to replicate them and you grow another 30%? That could be 80% in 2 years. Now, is that attainable? No, it might take you 3 years. That's still pretty good if you had a laser focus on it. So round out, retain, and replicate, ultimate marketing strategy. Our next one, the producer's improvement cycle. You know, I personally have run well over 100 producer training camps now, and as a company, we've probably done somewhere between 130, 150, including the private ones we've done. And we see that success and failure, by the way, both leave lessons. And when I look at producers, that really get it. I see through the years, it just kind of hit me one day as one of those, I like to call it blinding flashes of the obvious, the BFOs, that there is a normal progression that happens. So that the first thing we see that happens with the producers that really start getting just tremendous growth, they quantum leap their careers by 5 or 10 years, the first thing they improve is their conversion ratio. Now, what's conversion ratio? Most people don't measure it. It's what percent of the first appointment you have with a client move forward to the second. So if I go out just to meet somebody, meet and greet, do they move forward? I go out and I tell my story about not only what we do and how we do it, but more importantly, why we do it and how working with us will benefit your company, how it will help you control your total cost to risk, how it will make a better environment in your company, improve your overall results, etc. So I tell the story. We coined that the executive briefing. Well, what percent of executive briefing first appointments move forward to where we'll actually go out and start working with them? And in our case, it would be a risk reduction workshop followed by implementing a risk reduction plan for them. So the second thing we improve is closing ratio. Of all the clients we took through our process, and I hope you have a process, and for most people the process, George, you've heard me coin this before, for most people the old way process is look, copy, quote, and pray. And I'm going to look at your policies, I'll copy your policies, I'll give you a quote, and I'll pray that you really like what I did. And by the way, I might have to beg for you to return my phone calls too.
I've used that for years, Roger. I've quoted you for years. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the closing ratio is the people we agree to take through our process because we've qualified them. What percent of those join us? So if we can continue to improve our conversion rate, we can improve our closing ratio. Well, the next thing we want to do is improve our revenue per sales. Every sale we make, how much is it going up? And I'll never forget seeing you on stage, George, more years ago than we probably both want to admit, where you stood up there and you said, the size of your book of business and the size of your agency overall can be directly tied back to the average customer that you have. And I always say this in our producer camps because the producers, when they leave, they're motivated, they're ready to go. They have a clear vision of how they can go out and differentiate in their marketplace. And we'll say, how many of you believe that you can become $1 million producer, $1 million of commission income? And the vast majority of hands will go up. And I'll say, here's a problem. If you don't challenge and really attack your average account size, it'll be tough for you to do because you can't be $1 million producer selling $1,000 accounts. Why? Because you'd have to have 1,000 customers to get to $1 million. So you've got to drive that revenue per sale. And then finally, if we look at this, if I have a high conversion rate, anywhere from 50 to 75%, I have a high closing ratio of at least 75%, which I believe is minimum. We're constantly increasing the size of account we work on. Then the only thing we really have to focus on from that point forward is the quantity and quality of at-bats. Am I having enough at-bats, and are they quality at-bats? Do they match up against what a future ideal client looks like for my book of business or for my agency overall? So it's a lesson that we've learned, that we follow, and we teach all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 6, exit barrier strategies. As I mentioned earlier, one of the great things about our business is that such a high percent renew, okay? But at the end of the day, I think people sometimes lose fact of, or the impact of what we can do to make that even better. So when we look at it, we say, okay, what are the key things we can put in place that make it tough for someone to leave? Well, number 1, full-time clients only, as I already mentioned. I don't know why we would ever accept a part-time client at all. It's if we do order taking. But the number 1 exit barrier is full-time client. I believe that if no one else is in, no one else can get in. I also believe that the customers don't want to move. See, if they only have 1 or 2 policies with you, it's easy to move. If they have all of them with you, it's tough to move. Everybody knows that, but what are you doing about it? Secondly, it's the formal relationship management program that I mentioned. So if I have full-time clients and I have them in a relationship management program, I've done a profile about them, I know them, I get very close to them, I do things to improve their business. If I'm managing that relationship proactively, then I've got a better chance of keeping them. Everybody think about their best clients they have right now. Insurance is normally the last thing you talk about. You talk about the business, you talk about the family, you talk about activities, and then you get to insurance. You might talk about their business overall and how you can help them have a better business or get better results. And oh yes, insurance is something we do, because I firmly believe, and we teach this all the time, that if insurance is the only solution you provide today, you're a commodity broker. You've got to do more than that, so that insurance is just one of the things you talk about. Next, the continuation process. Again, some people call it renewal process. We believe, as I've said, that you don't renew accounts, you continue relationships. So what's the process you have in place that starts at policy delivery, that includes a calendar of services you're going to provide, obviously I'm talking commercial lines, includes a stewardship report, and it includes internally beginning work on the renewal 120 days ahead, not 90 days ahead like most people do. And then finally, and this is a huge one, being a member of the client's trusted advisor team. You know, we're either that commodity vendor that gets hired and fired based upon price, or we're a trusted advisor. And the filter we always use is just ask yourself this. Think of your best customers. When do they call you? They normally call you before they do something that has an insurance or risk management part of it versus afterwards. If a client calls you and says, hey, by the way, I just entered into a new lease and it's got some insurance requirements, I'd like you to look at it. Well, then you're just a vendor of a commodity. If they call you ahead of time and ask for advice, that's where you want to be. So I believe that vendors get routinely fired, as I've said. And I also believe that trusted advisors are very rarely fired. People don't routinely fire their attorneys, their CPAs, or their wealth managers, but they certainly routinely fire vendors. So if I can get these things in place and then tied to it, do what we call spear proofing. Spear proofing is a technique we used to teach, or spears themselves, but we found it got a little too aggressive because you could just beat up the incumbent agent way too much, and you make the client look stupid, the prospect look stupid for buying from them. You know, when your current agent does this, what happened? When your current agent does that, what happened? Well, so we don't use those anymore. We have a different way of asking questions to create pain. But internally, we still like the idea of spear proofing, because what we do is we take 5, 6, 7 questions, and we say, as part of our upfront renewal process, I'll call it that here, we say, if a competitor came in and asked this client these questions, what would their response be? So as an example, tell me what happens during the quarterly meetings you have with your current agent. You know, the what? Tell me what they've done to help you on disaster recovery planning and implementation. The what? What sort of wellness program do you have in place now? The what? So again, we don't do it external, we do it internal to make sure that no one can ever do that to our clients. So I believe if you have all of those things in place, you're probably going to keep the customer. Number 7, one of my favorite ones, and one that I'm pretty well known for through the years, no practice quoting. Wow, I just see producers for years have just given practice quotes, and we even have this little sign here, you know, that as an emblem of the universal no smoking. Well, it's universal no practice quoting. I believe practice quoting is giving a quotation to an unqualified prospect in order to get the incumbent agency to match your price while retaining the account, okay? And I just think that all too often people are selling, again, the old way of look, copy, quote, and pray, but they get in the door by saying, hi, we give great service, we've got great people, we've got all the carriers, and we've been in business 100 years. Nothing different about that. Oh, and by the way, we can save you money. All right, we'll let you give us a quote. We're trying to keep our current agent honest. Why would you waste your resource on that? You know,
of all the things that you've ever done, Roger, I know that these 2 words are you're most famous for, practice quoting. Nobody ever thought of it before. Nobody ever said it before.
Yeah. Well, you know, we say, what's the best day to lose the sale? It's the first day. Don't practice quote. I kid around and say that a lot of agencies buy their outdoor signs the same place most auto body shops buy their signs. It's a flashing neon sign that says free estimates. I love this no obligation quote. So we just believe you've got to learn to super qualify.
Amen.
Number 8, some words to live by. These were from a very famous Polish consultant to me. Hit me one day that this might be something that I should teach people, that yesterday becomes tomorrow unless you do something different today. You know, it kind of ties back to that. If you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Well, I think as the industry has changed, as technology has changed, as digital footprints have changed, as big data's come in, if you're still doing things the way you did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, you're probably not going to do well in the future. Now, if what you're doing today works and you get great results, keep doing it. But I think you just got to keep in mind that whatever happened yesterday is probably going to happen again tomorrow unless we commit to do something different today. From a behaviors and strategy standpoint, what do I have to do different to improve what? My results. What are my results? Whatever I want them to be in whatever area, but I've got to do something different. See, you know, George, one of the things that I really believe is that your future agency is a matter of choice, not chance. And by that, I mean, if you don't do anything, you know what, you'll still float along and you'll do okay, because in this business, you can do okay without doing a lot of stuff I talk about. But you won't get to the freedoms, you won't get to the real results you want by just waiting. So I think you have to make a choice of what you want your future agency to look like and start implementing change today. So again, the future agency you really want, the one you dream about, going, God, boy, someday if my agency could look like this, or as a producer, boy, if my book could be like this, you're dreaming about it. Well, that's a matter of choice, not chance. That's really how I came up with the saying. And it's from me, by the way. Okay.
Yeah, I love it.
Number 9, I wish I knew who in the heck taught me this one, because I'm a voracious reader, studier. I'm always looking to say, what's the next level? How can we get there? And one day I said, I wonder where that came from. Well, it's this concept of another question, another level. I believe there's always one more question we can ask ourselves. So no matter how good we are, well, how do we make this better? Or, what's the next question so that we never stop growing? So I believe there's always another question. There's always another level. No matter how good we get, we can get better. I think about the times, all of us, where we've really made a commitment to improve, and we're really better. And all of a sudden we look back and we think, my gosh, on a scale of 1 to 10, I used to think I was a 9. I was a 5 and didn't know it. Well, what they've done is you've raised the bar. So what used to be really great now becomes kind of average because you've raised the bar. It's sort of like people that really jump all over managing their KPIs, their key performance indicators, and they were really happy when they got to 150,000 of revenue per employee. But then all of a sudden they see somebody at 175, then 200, like our largest one right now, Flanders Group, a little bit over $250,000 of revenue per employee. Well, what's the next level? So if we always say, what's the next question, and what's the next level, we keep growing. I think it's important. And then lesson number 10 of the 265 and is also one of my favorite, the difference between low risk and high risk practice. One of the things that always amazes me is how people just don't want to practice. And there's a book I really like. It's the book's The Exceptional Presenter by Timothy Kogel. I have his name up here. And one of the best quotes in there is that people who practice get better, people who don't. Choose. Think about it. People who practice get better, people who don't. A lot of us like to golf, and I know I certainly do. But have you ever had one of you're in a foursome, those of you that do golf, you're in a foursome, you've got the same group that plays together every week or whatever, and all of a sudden one guy really gets better than the rest, and somebody will say, yeah, but he took lessons. Yeah, okay.
Unfair.
He took lessons, yeah. How unfair. Gee, he has the unfair advantage. You might take $10 from me today. So I really believe that you have to do practice in the agency, and yet most people will not practice. I've given some form of this presentation a bunch of times, and yet, even for today, George, I practiced 3 times before we got online.
No kidding.
I wanted to make sure that I owe it to the people. I owe it, to do a good job. So when you look at what's the difference between high risk and low risk, well, low risk practice is in the office in front of your peers. It's practicing some skills like how to ask questions, how to ask for referrals, how to leave a voicemail message of all things. But it's practicing in front of your peers, okay? High-risk practice is in front of clients or prospects. In other words, if you've never tried it before and the first time you do it is in front of them, you got a real good chance of blowing it. And I'm amazed when a producer will work very hard to get in the door on a prospect. The agency will commit a tremendous amount of resource to do the proper research on them, hopefully do a risk survey, go out and put together a great program with them, get a carrier, spend a lot of resource, and then the producer will go out and make the presentation live for the first time that they've never been forced to practice internally. And yet when I look at the best agencies, you know what? It's non-optional. If you're going out on an A or B account to make a presentation, whether it's property and casualty, benefits, financial services, whatever it may be, that you're going to have to present in front of at least one other person. We have some agencies that actually do. They have a 3-person sales committee, if you will, that says you can't go out unless you can sell it in front of these people. Now, guess what? They have closing ratios of 85. The best one we have right now is 94% closing ratio.
Wow.
Because they force them to do that. Now, why is it that most people don't want to practice in front of their peers? I think it's really, really simple. They don't want to look stupid. Well, my attitude is you're going to look stupid someplace. Where do you want to look stupid?
Yeah.
Are you going to look stupid internally? And by the way, the culture of the agency is to say, you know what, it's okay to blow it in here because we practice so that when we are in the game, we perform really well. Okay, we just had the All-Star game the other day. Those guys practice, all the time. In fact, in Kogel's book, he mentioned something really interesting. He was talking about this world-famous concert pianist who said, if I don't practice for 1 day, I can see a difference. If I don't practice for 2 days, my coach, my teacher, sees a difference. And if I don't practice for 3 days, my audience sees a difference. Wow. Well, you don't want to look stupid on stage. You don't want to look stupid in the game. So, George, those are the 10 items that we want to go through here, and we have an error on the slide. Sorry about that. But it's just a matter of, again, chance or choice. Where do you really want to go with this, okay? And if you really want to get the top 20 lessons, we can scan the code here. There's a website you can go to also. So those are really my thoughts for the day.
Roger, what you just said here should be the Bible, should be the for every independent insurance agency. The frustration I have when I see something like this, and this is as good as I've ever seen presentation, is getting it in to more people. It's just so, how do we get it around? How do we see more? But anyway, I can't say too much. I would like to suggest to people, if you're not reading Roger's column every month in Rough Notes, I don't see how you do this, Roger. You come up with something different every week, every month. And you've been doing it for years and years and years, and that's pretty scary. Yeah, I don't know where you get it. You must steal from the very best. I don't know. Oh no, you are the very best. I'm sorry. Yeah, people used to say, George, you're the only guy I know that could get information from one agent, get it to the other agent, and charge them both. Well, I don't know about that, but this has been a phenomenal. Now, if you'd like to get the that 20 book, you want to get to the 20 lessons, go back to the email, and we'll have a link in there that you can go to it. It's a download. It's free. There's nothing. And then pass it around and get your people in your agency to see it. And Roger, I don't know what else to say. It's such a pleasure to have you, and I'm thrilled that you were willing to do it. And I know you studied it, and you take time in your hours. And all I can say is the industry owes you a lot, and I guess you owe the industry a lot. But boy, oh boy, what a great lifetime! What you have done for this industry is amazing. So, for behalf of all of us, thank you. Keep them coming, and I'll be back at you again.
Well, thank you, George. My pleasure.